Another episode of our March Madness podcast here at NBC Sports Washington. Bob Trosset with you here in Bethesda, Maryland. And today we have a special guest. It's Coach Pat Clatchey of Mount St. Joe's High School varsity basketball over there in Baltimore, Maryland. Coach, thanks for taking some time.
I know. Appreciate you having me on. It's March Madness is always a great time of the year.
There's only so many more days that we can soak up of March, and all of a sudden it's April. I don't know where it went. I think we were having too much fun watching all the competition go down. But, Coach, the reason why I called you today is because, obviously, one of your former players, Phil Booth, is playing for another potential national championship in the year 2018. Just 2 years ago, obviously, they were able to bring home a national championship to Nova. And, he's really built something special there at Villanova. He's one of 3 players on that current Jay Wright roster who will compete for a second national championship in under 2 years, obviously. For starters, Coach, what was it like coaching Phil Booth?
Well, Phil's winning ways, at Villanova was a continuation from Mount St. Joe. Phil was a 4-year varsity player. I think we won like 5 or 6 championships while Phil was there. We won the BCL tournament 3 years in a row. We won a couple of BCL regular seasons and a couple of MIA championships as well. So, I think Phil's the type of player who is about winning, and he understands what it takes to win. And, I thought he made a great choice in going to Villanova. And it's worked out really well, except for, a few injuries here and there.
Certainly, and he's obviously a tough dude. I mean, he's been through it all there, and obviously Big East basketball is just about as competitive as it comes. All right, Coach, let's kind of rewind here to the time where you had to make a decision on Phil as a middle schooler, I should say. What did you see in that young Booth?
Well, it goes back even much further than that. I've known Phil's dad for probably close to 30 years. And, Phil has 2 sisters, one of them older, one of them younger. Phil's the middle child. So St. Joe's an all-boys school, so that wasn't going to work. But, I think he came from, his dad's background as a player, kind of old school Philly tough. And, he was a really talented player in middle school, and I thought his game was very versatile. He could handle the ball, he could pass, he could shoot, he had good size. So it wasn't hard to figure out he was going to be a really good player. We just had to make sure that he came to Mount St. Joe. And, obviously there was a lot of other high school options for him, and, we were very fortunate that the family and Phil chose to continue his education and basketball career at Mount St. Joe.
You mentioned his father, obviously. Mr. Booth had passed down the love of the game to Phil. He played at Coppin State. I read something interesting on Twitter recently that what he said to Jay Wright Phil's freshman year was really kind of telling about who he is. He said, essentially, he's yours. You're not going to hear from me for 4 years. We're going to be in the stands. We're going to be there every game that we can get to, but you're not going to hear from me as a parent. Did you have that same experience with Mr. Booth?
Yeah, pretty much the same line, and he held true. He's obviously he knows the game, and Phil's the type of parent that's like, okay, you're the coach. I'm his dad. Now it's your job to coach him, and then there was, no interference whatsoever. Tell you what's interesting about Phil and his parents. His mom and dad, they don't sit together at the games.
Really?
Yeah, they sit apart. I've come across a couple other parents recently that do the same thing. They just said, "Oh, this works out much better."
Oh, that's funny. Hey, whatever works.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you keep up with these guys. Once they leave Mount St. Joe's, they leave Baltimore. If they're leaving the city to pursue an education outside the city, I'm sure that you try and keep up with them. What have you seen from Phil in his transition from high school to college basketball?
Well, he's kind of made that transition. He starts out at Mount St. Joe at 14, and now he's probably 21, 22 years old. He's an adult. He's a man. Where before, he was kind of approaching that process. Um, you know, Jay has just raved about Phil's leadership abilities, and to be honest, even from looking from afar, sacrificing. Um, and I'll give you a good example. When they beat UNC, Phil had 20 points in that game. A lot of people tend to forget that because of, and no knock on Chris Jenkins, but he knocked down the game-winning shot, and it was probably one of the greatest shots in the history of the NCAA tournament. But even at that point, Phil kind of got pushed kind of in the background. So I think Phil has really become like a jack of all trades, sort of a Swiss Army knife. Just even recently, his defensive when he guarded Keenan Evans, and I'm trying to think of the guy from West Virginia, Javon Carter. I mean, he held those guys below their scoring average, and people tend to overlook those things. But I think that Phil, he's all about winning and winning the big prize.
Clearly, he's fit right into Coach Wright's system, and he's got something special going on there, pretty obviously, if you take a look at the last few years for Villanova. Let's kind of get into that game a little bit more. What did it do for your program, the fact that Phil brought home a national championship?
Well, previously we had one other guy, Will Thomas, who played in the Final Four, that magical run with George Mason, and that was a year at St. Joe where we were actually 38-1. So I don't drink wine, but 2006 would have been a great year for wine. But so it was really fun to watch. Will go through that experience. They were sort of the first mid-major, the first Cinderella to kind of, bust up the brackets and climb the ladder. They beat UNC, they beat Michigan State, they beat Wichita State, and they beat UConn to get there. And then, we've had, a fair amount of guys playing the tournament. We had 3 this year, Cam, Phil, and Jalen Adams. But to see, one of your players, win the ultimate prize and score 20 points on that stage, yeah, that was very special.
In terms of your incoming recruiting classes, did you see a direct correlation between the two?
Rephrase that for me. Say that again.
Sure. After they won the national championship, did that put a certain stigma around your program, and did it hype it up for incoming recruiting classes for years to come?
I don't think it hurts. We've had a pretty successful program, for a while, and I think when parents and middle school student athletes, you can tell them, hey, we've had guys play in the national championship. We've had guys play in the NBA. We've had, double-figure guys play pro overseas. Yeah, I think that gets their attention, and I think it lends to a certain level of credibility as a coach and as a staff. And, those guys are also being prepared academically as well. Phil has made the honor roll, all Big East academic honor roll a few times as well.
Coach, if I checked my facts correctly here, I believe you just finished up your 22nd season coaching at Mount St. Joe's. You were you had a 3-year run, I should say, as an assistant coach at UMBC, which we should get into that in a minute. And then, of course, you had a little bit of pro scouting time with the Lakers and the Bullets. So what is it about this game that hasn't kept you away from it?
It's actually my 26th year at St. Joe's, the head coach.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, I just have always I think when I turned like 12 years old, I was really into baseball, and then I grew up in Baltimore City, and there was a baseball field on one side, and then there was the basketball court, and I was like, man, the guys over there playing basketball look like they're having a lot more fun, than these baseball guys sitting out here, waiting for the ball to get hit to them. So I started kind of mingling over to the courts, and was an average to decent player, but just kind of developed a passion for the game, and wasn't going to make it as a player. Was not going to get into the officiating. I don't like people really yelling at me. So I really got into the coaching part of it and started working camps, especially 5-star. I worked 5-star. That was really the big thing before, the AAU came into play, and just kept learning the game. And, I got an opportunity to coach the freshman team at Mount St. Joe for 4 years, and we won the championship all 4 years. And I'm like, I like this. And, I went and spent some time, 3 years at UMBC when they first became Division I, and then I did some pro scouting for a year. And then at age 29, was fortunate enough to get the job at Mount St. Joe, and been there ever since. And, we've had a great run. It took a while to get the program built, but we've had a lot of success, and, we really emphasize recruiting, young men of character, guys that are very capable students who, value the importance of their education, but the talent and the ability as well. And, I have a lot of respect for the Villanova program and, how Coach Wright runs the program and how the program has been built.
Well, I think your recruiting speaks for itself when you take a look at the last several, recent years at Mount St. Joe's. Jalen Smith, Daryl Morcell, Jalen Adams, Henry Sims, Cam Williams, Will Thomas. You can go on and on. Eric Atkins, and that certainly speaks for itself. Now, what I want to talk about is this UMBC run, because you had a little bit of an assistant coaching run there. What I'm really interested in, obviously, that was well before all of this sort of madness has happened this month, but what do you make of the UMBC run? Is it a product of the talent in the area? Is it certain chance that this happened? What do you make of what went down just a few weeks ago?
I live about 5 minutes from UMBC, and I coached there, and I've known Ryan Odom for quite a while. I actually knew his dad from 5-star, and I remember Ryan coming up through the ranks. He spent a lot of time. So he played at the Division III level at I believe at Hampton Sydney, and he got into coaching, several stops as an assistant coach, and he's proven. I think the thing at UMBC, people are like, oh wow, they got into the tournament and beat Virginia. It's like, well, that's phenomenal, no question about it. But let's backtrack that. They knocked off the Vermont Dragon, which was the dominant team in that league, for the past few years on their home court to get into that position. But at the same point in time, they've won 46 games in 2 years. I think Ryan has, really just turned the program around, and, they play fast on offense, but people kind of really overlook how good they were defensively as the year went on. They really – They didn't beat Virginia at the buzzer. Now they beat them by 20, and I think they kind of captured the basketball world by storm. I read something the other day where if they would have had to pay for the publicity that generated, it would have been $20 million a day.
I saw that as well.
Yeah,
you can't wrap your head around that type of number.
Yeah. The day they were playing Kansas State, I sent Ryan a text. I said, Ryan, I heard something from my wife I never thought I would hear. It was like, we need to make sure we were home from dinner in time to watch the UMBC game.
And that explains it right there. And how many other people were on that same wavelength?
Oh, yeah. And I'm one of Ryan's assistants, Eric Skeeters, is a longtime friend and a Baltimore guy. And Eric was part of the staff when Coppin beat Oklahoma back in the day. So he's been part of two of the biggest upsets in the history of the NCAA tournament.
That's the type of thing that you wouldn't know. And obviously he's burst onto the national scene now. You love to see it right in our backyard. Mm-hmm. And you love to also see the local guys that are on that team, especially Lyles from Silver Spring, really taking center stage after a great career there at UMBC. Should be really fun to
Yeah.
watch, see what they can do in the America East going forward, Coach.
Well, they have a new facility which is really, really nice and was long overdue. I've always, just being, in the local scene with Baltimore basketball, and some guys have done a really good job at the smaller Division I level. I just think that you have to keep the share of good players home. I mean, Jamie and Christian, at Mount St. Mary's, they went to the NCAA tournament 2 years ago, and so forth. I think that you really have to get some of those local guys to see the value in staying home. I mean, Jarius Lyles, he was at two other schools before UMBC and had an option to leave UMBC and play somewhere else and didn't do it. So I think he made the right decision.
It's the beauty of their win. They clearly do not pick up that win versus Virginia without him. So
no question. And UMBC's got a pretty good core of talent back, and obviously they redid Ryan's contract, and rightfully so. But it's hard to keep good coaches at those levels for a long period of time.
Coach, before we get you out of here, this is the final setup right here. Obviously, just a day away from the Final Four finally kicking off here down in San Antonio. Loyola Chicago will take on Michigan in the first game just after 6 o'clock. And then Kansas will take on Villanova in a pair of number 1 seeds. What's your gut telling you?
Yeah, well, I think it's been one of the best tournaments ever. I mean, Loyola Chicago has come out of nowhere. Porter Mosier is Rick Majerus' disciple. John Beilein is, obviously one of the best coaches in the country. Bill Self, same thing. But I'm going to go with the Villanova Wildcats playing Michigan in the finals, and Villanova winning their second national championship.
Love it, Coach. I love the trust and commitment there. It's a great answer.
Yeah.
Staying safe. It should be an awesome matchup there. Both games tomorrow. Coach, appreciate you taking some time. Obviously, head skipper over there at Mount St. Joe. I'll have to catch a game next season, see what you're doing there with the program. It's been awesome to watch, and awesome to see that you'll be able to watch one of your former players yet again on such a prominent stage.
Yeah, we were using a trivia question this year on our Twitter account. It was, what high school is the only high school to have a McDonald's All-American and a player in the Final Four? And the answer was Mount St. Joe. So, yeah, Jalen with what he did and has been great. And, Jalen Adams was playing in the NABC Final Four All-Star game, but unfortunately tweaked his ankle. So, yeah, it's been a great run, and it's always great to see our former players be successful, both on and off the court.
Great representation of the area as well.
Yep. Thank you.
Coach Clatchey, thanks for your time.
I appreciate it. Take care.
That's Mount St. Joe in Baltimore, head skipper of varsity basketball, Pat Clatchey, as we make our way into the Final Four of 2018.